The Texas jail where Sandra Bland died needs a major overhaul, according to an independent panel tasked with looking into her death. The findings say that the Waller County Jail staff persistently dehumanized inmates. Recommended changes include better mental health screenings for inmates, body cameras and anger management training for jailers, and a new building. Bland was found hanged in her cell in July, 3 days after being arrested near Houston for minor traffic violations. Her death caused a national outcry after a grand jury decided not to indict anyone in her case. Waller County Sheriff Glenn Smith said many of the recommendations in the report are doable and staff de-escalation training will start in June. We're going back to the panel. Ralph Chittums of the Republican Party, Michelle Bernard, political analyst and attorney with the Bernard Center for Women, Politics, and Public Policy, and David Swerdlick, assistant editor at the Washington Post. This, to me, sounds an awful lot like the Chicago report just moved to another state.
I could barely watch just the clip that we just took a look at and look at her face. It is one report after another, and the country needs to be outraged. There is no way that we can continue to look at death after death after death and people not have a sense that the African American community is under attack. No one wants to confront the issue. Whites get so angry when you say that there appears to be a war on black boys and black men, that there is a war on African American women, but it looks to me like we are slaughtered. And a report comes out and everything is supposed to be better. Nothing's changing.
No,
David?
I agree. Yeah.
Ralph?
I do agree. I mean, when people die in police custody, there has to be an investigation. There has to be. There's no reason for someone to just be picked up for a minor traffic violation and then within a day or two they're dead in a cell and there's no investigation, there's no accountability.
I mean,
What I find interesting here is it says in the report, the findings say that the Waller County Jail staff persistently dehumanized inmates. When you talk about dehumanizing inmates, that has nothing to do with a new building. That has very little to do with anger management. To me, we're talking about a problem that as Africans in America and now African Americans, we have been battling since we got here in 1619, and that is to be considered human beings. How does a report change that type of misperception?
It can't. I mean, the culture has to fundamentally change. And with regard to the criminal justice system, I question whether or not the culture can change until we start not only investigating police misconduct, and again, with the caveat being, police work is so difficult. But when there are misdoings, there needs to be an investigation and people need to be arrested and imprisoned.
I mean, I have family members and friends in law enforcement from here to California, across the country, and I can say with 100% certainty that most law enforcement officers are good.
Yes.
They get up every morning, they put on that uniform, the badge, the gun, and when they kiss their wife or husband and go walk out the door, everyone understands there's a good chance that they may not come home that night.
That is true.
But that doesn't change the fact that when one of these law enforcement officers crosses the line and does something wrong, that officer needs to be held accountable. But I would just caution everyone not to just throw a blanket indictment across all law enforcement officers.
And no one is doing that, and this report isn't doing that, but there are too many innocent people being shot down in the street, and it's been going on for far too long. And the major thing, I think, that has really brought all this to the forefront is video.
Right.
Here's another story I want to talk about. Take a listen.
I've listened to the people of North Carolina, and the people of North Carolina are entitled to both privacy and equality. We can and we must achieve both of these goals.
In response to the backlash over North Carolina's so-called bathroom bill, Governor Pat McCrory has signed an executive order as a sort of peacemaker. Under the executive order, restrictions on which bathrooms transgender people use will remain, but employment protections are expanded based on sexual orientation and gender identity. The change comes after public corporations and celebrities criticized the original law, but many say the change is not enough. The American Civil Liberties Union of North Carolina says the discrimination against LGBT individuals remains and says the lawsuit against the state will proceed. In Mississippi, lawmakers are calling for the repeal of a new law that will let workers use their religious beliefs to deny services to gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. The lawmakers hope to undo the measure before it becomes law July 1st. But supporters of both laws say leaders shouldn't cave to the public backlash.
Eventually it's coming here. It's not a question of whether or not it's going to be an issue here. It will be. And if evangelicals in the state of South Carolina don't start getting together, putting something together, trying to combat this, this is what we're going to have to continue. And it's not going to stop.
And still with me on the panel, Ralph Chittims, Michelle Bernard, and David Swerdlick. What are your thoughts? Let's first start with the North Carolina bathroom bill.
Well, I look at it this way. I'm a father of 4. My wife and I, we have 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. If I walked around my house, butterball naked, with my genitals exposed to my daughters, and someone outside my home found out about it, they would make a call to Child and Family Services, and I would be investigated for child abuse. How then can someone go into a public shower, swimming pool locker room as a man and fully disrobe in front of girls, and that be okay? But if I were to do something similar inside of my own home, I would lose my children and be charged with child abuse. So I have no problem with this bathroom bill. If you now, I'm assuming, Michelle, that you're a woman, and
Well,
I'm assuming that you 2 gentlemen are men, but I don't know what's under your clothing. Now, if you walk into the ladies' room, that's fine, because that's how you present. If you happen not to be a woman and you have male parts under those clothing, if you keep your mouth shut and go into the ladies' room, who's going to know?
Look, I think I don't understand your point.
The point if you are a transgender person and you present as the opposite gender, if you keep your mouth shut, go do what you're going to do, and don't try to make a political point about it.
And to Ralph's point, before we go to Michelle, there is, to my knowledge, no data to demonstrate that this is a problem.
That's exactly what I was going to comment on. It is, to me, the state should be embarrassed, and it will have a negative impact on the state in every area that you can possibly imagine, and it should. It is discriminatory. It is absolutely insane and ridiculous. And the fact, if somebody is a member of the LGBT community, that does not automatically mean that that person is somehow a threat to you, physically or in any other way. Just like a black man walking into a room is not a threat to people simply because he's black. I think it's the height of hypocrisy.
Quickly, David.
So since we talked about that part of the law, let me talk about the less talked about part of the law, which is that the state government passed part of the law saying that local governments can't pass more tolerant laws and more stringent anti-discrimination laws, which is strange coming from conservatives who usually say the government that's closest to the people is best. But if my hometown, Chapel Hill, wants to pass a law that's a tighter anti-discrimination law, they now can't under this law, which I think is a failure on the part of the Republicans.
In terms of Mississippi and this so-called religious freedom law, it is nothing but utter foolishness. If you, in order to do business, have to get a license from the state to conduct that business, then your religious issues, preferences, or proclivities are secondary. No one should be able to use their religious base as a means of discrimination for any reason at all.
Well,
Can I just
think
raise
we
a
all
point?
agree that if someone is homosexual, goes into a bakery and wants to buy a cupcake.
This sounds like a bad joke.
Right, but there is no legitimate reason that store owner should not sell that cupcake to that person. Now, the difference is if that same person comes in and says, I want you to participate in my wedding, and that is a religiously held position that I don't agree with that.
You have to get a license from the state to do business. You do business.
Look, I want to just.
It's
You
condoning
do
the ceremony,
business.
and you should not be forced
Now,
to do that.
The point I want to raise, which is tangential but important, is that in most of the stories that we read about or we hear about where these types of things are happening are in the South. They are in states that are no longer covered under part of the Voting Rights Act that was struck down by the United States Supreme Court. And it is another reason that every American should be very, very vigilant in figuring out who they are going to vote for the presidency of the United States, because the next person on the Supreme Court will be making decisions about these very issues. And if the part of the Voting Rights Act has already been stripped away and states that were covered in the South under the act are no longer covered, it could be a free-for-all on individual liberty and individual rights.
Now, to Ralph, to your point, if you go into a bakery and you want that bakery to cater your wedding and you're gay, and that individual tells you, I'm not really comfortable doing this, and you still try to do business with that person, then you're a fool. You're just an utter fool. And I don't have any problem with the baker saying, your sexual preference is not, I'm not really comfortable with that, and I'll do it, but I really rather not. That to me is fine. But I say again, if you have to get a license from the state to do business, then you have to do business with everybody in the state.
Well, there's an issue of state licensure. I think that's an interesting point on the issue, Wilmer, as well. Ralph and I were talking about this a little before the show. I think the problem we have religious freedom in this country, clearly. But the problem with the religious freedom argument that's being made by proponents of these laws, like the Mississippi law, is that it's not clear to me at all that when someone comes to a cake maker and says, I want you to make the cake for my wedding, or a photographer for my wedding, and maybe they're a heterosexual couple, but maybe they had premarital sex, they're not being shut out, even though that's not Christian. There's a double standard at play here that I think is hard for
great point. I got to stop you there.
Yeah.
Coming up, actor Wendell Pierce shares how he channeled Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas past to portray him in the upcoming HBO film Confirmation. It's 32 after the hour. Stay with us. We'll be right back.